Hello, everyone. I think maybe it's time to make a start. Welcome to the defense briefing from Deal Room. My name is Orla Browne. I'm head of insights here at Deal Room, and I'm joined by my colleague Lorenzo. We've been doing these briefings over the last few months on different topics that are of interest to our audience in different aspects of the tech sector. And this is one that's been in high demand on defense tech. So a little bit about Deal Room first, maybe. Deal Room is a global platform that tracks startups, investment, innovation, and we track the world's most promising companies and startup ecosystems with a source of record on all things tech ecosystems and innovation. We work with many of the world's leading VC investors, but also corporates and over 120 governments at local, regional, national, and international level, helping them to understand their tech ecosystems, their innovation ecosystems as well. So yeah, without further ado, we'll get cracking. So Lorenzo is going to start by taking us through some of the findings, the latest data and trends in defense tech. Do please drop questions into the chat. Let us know also where you're dialing in from. We'll try and address the questions either as we're going along or at the end as well. We'd love to make it as interactive and relevant for you all as possible as well. So Lorenzo, over to you maybe.
Hi, thanks all for being here. Yeah, I'm the head of research at Deal Room, and yeah, we have been doing a lot of work around defense recently in the last couple of years, of course. And yeah, today I will present a bit of updated data, as of like yesterday, and some from September that we presented at the Resilience Conference, and walk you through the state of the market. And then yeah, we can see things live, get on questions, or really drop any suggestion of things you want to ask. So yeah, first of all, people intend a lot of different things with defense. So we always try to clarify, what we're talking about. In this case, when I say defense, is really for us what is like defense first and defense applications. So it's companies that have as main application, the defense military market, or it's really one of the core segments. It's not like companies that might have, 1% or might somehow be dual use someday. No, it's really companies that are already working with clear application there. And then another, bucket of companies and a segment that we look at that is broader is the defense, security, and resilience. Sometimes some things that are in here people consider as pure defense, but we like to keep the things separate and use these two lenses. So in defense, security, and resilience, that it's a terminology we worked a lot with Nato Innovation Fund to define some of these segments, and we include in there pure space from launch vehicles to in-space manufacturing, things like that. The quantum computing or some AI chips, some critical, let's say, infrastructure, but also energy security, resilience. All these things are very relevant for defense and security, and are not like directly military or at least they also have big commercial markets, and there are a bit of different characteristics. So we like to separate the trends in both of them. So to go a bit more concrete, when we talk about defense, security, resilience, and this is how we look at it, there's like the first two buckets on the left are the more like defense adjacent. So, like stuff like drones or other autonomous unmanned systems, for surveillance or for, intelligence understanding, things like that. And also the active ones, that maybe, directly in the warfare, and also access to space, and both these on air, ground, and naval application, of course. Then there's like more the security part, which is around energy, of course, super important topic, a lot about sources like nuclear, storage, things like that. And then on the critical infrastructure side, so there is where we have quantum, some computing parts, photonics, things like this. Or very deep tech hardware, things like that. And then we have the supply chain resilience part. So it can be critical materials, it can be advanced material for application in aerospace, in semiconductor, things like that can be a bottleneck if you need to ramp up industrial production in critical cases. And then the health crisis preparedness. So there it's also about how do you react to like a pandemic or a bio attack or things like that. So it's about fast testing, it's about getting quickly, a new vaccine or therapy, it's about manufacturing these things with biomanufacturing. So all of these, we then create an umbrella that is this defense, security, resilience.
And on that, because I think that there are a lot of different terms that are used, such as dual use and such as defense, security, resilience, also deep tech. Could you consider sort of most of what people call dual use, is that effectively deep tech? Because I've also heard someone say before, anything that is deep tech is also dual use. But
yeah, so that's, as you might notice, I don't think I will ever say dual use today. We typically stay away from that terminology in the sense that, yeah, we agree that practically anything can be dual use, depending what you mean. It's also like some things that are that we consider security resilience are not dual use per se. Like nuclear fusion is not dual use to me, like you don't put that on the battleground or something like that, but it's critical for, maybe energy security if you can achieve that, or, energy storage. So there are things that are not directly dual use, but they can be security resilience. On the other side, anything can be dual use. One example that's actually notable that we don't include in most of what we'll show today, it's cybersecurity, because that's mostly, SaaS and there's a very big commercial market. So we typically all include very specific companies that are, at the national security level, things like that. It's an adjacent market that's important, but it doesn't follow the same trends. It has very different characteristics, so we typically don't put it there. So dual use and defense, security, resilience have some overlap, but they're different concepts, let's say.
Okay, it is also still relevant to be talking about these security and resilience parts here, because they are actually areas that ministries of defense would be thinking about and planning for.
Yeah, and some companies here have similar restrictions to pure defense startups. For instance, if you are a quantum company, you are subject to export restriction, you are subject to maybe screening from governments on the financing grounds or the exit. So you have similar challenges or like things that you need to be also aware of that might be in common with, just a drone maker or like some munition. So there are some reasons why these are under the same umbrella also.
Nice, makes sense. But yeah, with the data that we compile as well, and because this is at a company level data in the Deal Room platform, you can slice and dice it how you like. So if you just want to look at that pure defense stuff, you can. But equally, if you want to look at these other onion layers of the ecosystem, you can as well.
Yeah, and then so of course, we have mappings in the room and resources that can help you kind of get a bit the sense of what's in there. So you can check these resources. They will be in what you receive also after the webinar, so you can actually check which companies we are putting in this bucket. So that's typically the best way to really understand what's underlying the data. And then yeah, when we look at this sector in Europe, for instance, it's across defense, security, resilience. We are now almost at 7 billion this year and growing quite strongly from last year, 44%. Defense per se is around 1/3, 1/4 of this, so 1.7 billion this year, but growing even faster. So definitely, there's really a strong market and momentum behind these things. We can also see that related topics like semiconductor are also attracting a lot of attention. So it's a broader market, and this is growing a lot faster than the overall deep tech that we see as first row. That is kind of only 15% over a year at the moment.
Okay, yeah, because there has also been a lot of hype around defense tech the last year or so, sort of in terms of the press, but it is growing very fast, but it is also from a relatively low base.
Yeah, it's a new segment, especially in Europe, but also globally. Even in the US, it's been growing a lot. Even if there was some focus even years ago, and when you're a new sector, of course, there's a lot of growth, and everyone starts to say that it's a bubble, whatever. We can discuss that. Happy to have questions about that, but definitely, we don't know yet what will be the level where it kind of settles down. So we still have to see, where we land, basically. Yeah, and then when we look, more granularly, there's of course a lot that is in red here. In the two shades of red, you can see like the mega rounds, so the really big financing. So that's making a lot of this amount, but it's also even the blue part at the bottom that's growing. So there's strong activity both at early stage and late stage. So it's not just mega financing, but the whole market is very active. And we can see that, for 4 years back, that was like 3-4 times less. So that when it started to pick up. And when we see, across the whole NATO, it's a very similar trend, more or less. There was quite a lot in the US also in 2021, so a bit earlier than when it picked up in the rest of the world. But anyway, across all of NATO, it's like almost double last year. And definitely the most active year ever. So the activities is in all the NATO countries is very strong. It's not just us and Europe story. And of course, in total volume, US is still quite big. When we look at the last few years aggregated, the US has been like 85% of the total market inside NATO countries, followed by EU with like 10% and the UK with around 3%.
Just to go back a couple of slides, Lorenzo, I had a question. If you go back to yes, this one. Yeah, so someone asked about the years because they've
something went wrong here with the cropping. We will fix before we send it to you. You can assume it's 2025, so the last one, and then you have to calculate mentally. Sorry for this. We'll fix in what we send you. We were trying to update the numbers today, but yeah, something went wrong in the years of the label.
Yeah, but it's interesting here that as well. I mean, we were talking about it growing from a low base, and you also highlighting the mega rounds, but there literally were no mega rounds before 2020. So it really is a maturing segment, and yeah, that growth, a lot of it has come from those later stage 100 million plus rounds. But yeah, as you say, the blue part here, which is pre-seed, seed, and Series A rounds, are also growing. They're sort of double the level of just a few years ago.
Yeah, and we can also see it in a slightly different lens, which is this. So like when we look at how much of the total VC funding is going into defense tech, that was kind of 0.45%, more or less, for like the last 7 years, whatever, until 2022, and then it really picked up. Especially in Europe and EU. So that's now around 4% for Europe, and even higher, 6.2% for the EU. While if we look at across all the NATO allies, we see that it was a bit of an higher base due to the US, but still we see a really strong growth from 2022 onwards. And we typically compare this with the targets that NATO has set, on the defense spending. So for a long time, that was like the 2%. So kind of until 2022, 2023, we can see that the VC funding was below that 2%. Even if it's not the same stuff, of course, like that's GDP spending on military. But one can draw some parallels in some ways. And now we are, of course, quite above that, but also the NATO target is being revised, and now it's talking about 3.5%, some countries even 5%. So we are kind of still in that range. It's not like a crazy gap between the two numbers. Yeah. And then when we look inside Europe specifically, we can see that Germany is definitely the geography that has been dominating, both in like absolute financing in the first two columns in different time frames, and then also in terms of the share of the total VC funding of the country that has gone to defense. A lot of this is helping, but not only. There's quantum systems, robotics, there's so many companies that, and especially we will see Munich. Then the UK also has a decently active scene, even if typically the UK is a really big market for startups in Europe, and it's a bit pushing below its weight in defense, while it's attracting actually a lot of international startups to set up their offices in the UK, things like that. But domestically, there's a bit of a less strong startup scene than in other sectors, also around deep tech. And then there's some bits in Southern Europe across mostly Spain and Portugal, some in France, and then the rest of Europe is a bit behind. CE has a lot of early stage strong activity, but we need to see still those companies scale up, and we will have some reporting on that very soon.
It is interesting seeing Germany at the top there, where, as you said, in any other chart on kind of startups and venture capital, UK would be number one by quite a distance in Europe. And do you have a kind of view on why that is? You said it's strong in some of the other deep tech areas, and sort of quantum for sure, and others. Is it do we see the same pattern in the number of startups, and then they're just not getting funded, or is it a cultural thing? Do you have any kind of guesses about why?
Yeah, for sure, there's a bit of when we talk about this, there's a lot of geopolitics and what kind of push you put behind. But yeah, if we look at the number of companies, the picture is not that extreme. Actually, the UK has even more startups than Germany in absolute number in defense, but it's missing a few of these very big players. There's now this a bit secretive Cambridge Aerospace, which is like the biggest player that has come up in the UK. So we will see, maybe in the coming months what happens there. But yeah, there's we can speculate a bit for the reason, but there's a bit less very big outcomes that have come up in this specific sector. While if we look at quantum or other topics, then there's really big companies that have been created in the UK, Quantino, Mosporionics, that's been just acquired and so on, while in defense a bit less.
You mentioned as well, we've kind of left out cyber here, and that is an area where UK has some bigger outcomes as well. So that's relevant to mention.
Question on
yes.
On the investor, we will get to that in a bit. But yeah, I agree with Alan. Of course, yeah, the UK has a less of a priority in some ways, even if it's not that far for anyone in Europe, let's say.
Yeah.
Yeah, and when we look at the cities, then we see what we were saying before. Munich is like the complete outsider here, that's really becoming like the top path for security and defense in Europe. Beyond that, really a lot of startups that I was mentioning before, as robotics, quantum system, and so on. In the UK, we see that the ecosystem is a lot more spread. And then, we do have a couple of other, European capital like Paris and Berlin with a bit. Then we have a couple of, big outcomes like from Lisbon, like TechEver, that can still a bit the picture. But it's very concentrated in these few apps, the startup scene. Of course, it's very early stage, so we will see in the coming years. But these have been the apps that move faster, let's say.
Yeah, again, this is funding since 2019, and these aren't huge numbers for
it's not.
So if you were to think about the levels of defense spending, it is still pretty early stage and early days for defense in Europe and these hubs.
Yeah, and when we look at the key topics, I think there are two areas where most of the activity has been concentrated, and actually they are even converging a bit today. So we will have to discuss how we showcase this. But at the moment, we were talking about AI per defense, where the approach was first coming from the software side, from the applied autonomy AI processing. So we put here Helsing. Even if, recently, of course, it has been going a lot verticalized on the hardware side. So it's also crossing into the robotics and autonomous system directly. And then, other players in this space. And we see that there's been a lot of funding in there, like in terms of numbers, and a good activity in terms of number of rounds, while in robotics and autonomous system, which is for like 90% plus drones, UAVs, then there's some ground robotics and naval and maritime. We see a lot of startups. So you can see also the high number of rounds and the amount a bit smaller. So that tells you that there's a lot of very small early stage rounds, a lot of startups competing in this space. Feedback from the ecosystem, it's also that they see this, and many are saying it's a bit too much. There's always some areas that that are still investors are still looking at. One is anti-drone systems, for instance, but maybe the direct FPV or surveillance. There's already a lot of them. This is mixing our data with feedback from the ecosystem. Then there's what we see, of course, weapon and defense system. Very few companies. Some of them are scaling up, but it's a trickier segment where there's also some restriction on the investor and so on. And then there's a few other topics where there's mostly early stage startups still. Yeah.
With the drones segment that you mentioned there, could part of it also be to do with the fact that this is kind of it's not as frontier technology anymore? I suppose it's more developed, and so maybe they are accessing different types of financing rather than venture capital, or that it's not such a need for a venture play now.
Yeah, I think it's a mix of things. Like so, first of all, in here we don't put all drones. We put only the drones manufactured that have clear application in defense. So there's also like quite big startups in that is adjacent, and some of them might repurpose them in the future and so on. So there's this, and yeah, I think there's still tech development, but there's also, of course, the key topic is that, well, I think the runaway numbers are like around 1.5 million or even 4 million per year of drones now, for instance, in Ukraine. So, of course, they're becoming like cheap assets that need to be disposed, like reproduced, remanufactured quickly. And it's more about having the industrial base, to quickly ramp up production. And of course, there's also a bit of, questions about what will happen, because they are more immediate related to the direct use every day, on the front line. While if you build, a security system for missiles, or if you build, quantum for something, it's a bit also longer term. So that might also impact a bit these trends. So of course some of them will raise different type of financing, maybe just for the manufacturing side. But there's also really a lot of early stage startups in drones.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, and when we look, we were saying some adjacent markets. Of course, like space, that's also one of the reasons why we keep it a bit separate, is that it was a big segment already, before the recent shifts. There was already like a quite strong commercial push, even if, very in delay compared to the US in some sense, but, it's still very active, mixing up between the commercial and defense side. Quantum has been like really ramping up with a lot of milestones, big funding rounds, exits. So definitely a strong moment for that. I was getting a quote from one of the leading founders in Europe, and what he was saying is that he feels this is one of the space where Europe can still win the race if he really manage things well, while some other topics are a bit gone in his view. So there's, it's definitely one sector where we see really a strong activity and a lot of scale up, but still a lot of new companies joining. And then in broad, the semiconductor space beyond quantum is also quite active, but there are a lot of trends in there, like photonics has been growing quite a lot, while maybe other topics a bit going down in the year. So that there are a few shifts internally, but overall there's still quite a lot of attention there.
And I think a little bit more attention coming to quantum in terms of those acquisitions and exits that you mentioned, and people looking at where the acquirer is and whether they can be remain onshore. Some of these very exciting companies.
Yeah, no. So I think what I was mentioning before, of course, like for example, one of the big acquisitions this year, like of course, was Oxford Ionics in the UK. Like a spin, actually quite a quick win in some way for the UK tech scene, because it was spun out from Oxford in 2019. So already he exited for 1 billion plus this year. So that's quite quick turnaround. I guess investors were happy. On the other side, like this is on both a win for the UK ecosystem, but it was acquired, of course, by a player outside of Europe, IonQ. So that's also raised some of the questions on, can you build these champions in here? So IonQ is like really big, like probably the biggest startup related company in quantum. Is now around 22 billion of valuation, publicly listed. And so for them, it's like, using some of this public money to acquire a really promising company and then, co-develop the technology. Of course, the UK has another champion in Quantinum. So, there's still stuff there, but, we see a lot of the acquisition coming, of course, from outside Europe. Most from the US, so still, in theory, Nato allies, but still raise some concern in some cases.
Yeah, important for governments to have an eye on the startups building these critical technologies, because, as you said, they can be built, scaled, and sold off abroad quite quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is something we get asked often by government related to look at any sort of capital or exit that comes from certain regions in these topics, and then of course that there's some kind of monitoring of this, but and then decision get taken case by case. Yeah, no, exactly. So when we look at quantum, of course, very strong active scene in Europe. Some of the leading companies in here. And then when we look at the investor side, this is a bit how we think about it. So there's now quite a large scene of defense-focused, defense-first fund. They typically very early stage. A lot of them launched in the last few years. So these are, people that are really defense first. Many of them have even connection with Ukraine, or some of them in back companies there. Some of these are still finalizing their fundraising. We still add them here. There's a couple that are trying to raise bigger funds, like 150 million plus. But overall, that this scene has really grown a lot. Then there's the space investor scene. This is a bit more established, even with a few newer players. Like some of them have been around for a few years more, and they do, of course, invest in the intersection between space and defense, which is quite large, but it's still a bit of a separate thing. And then there's of course a lot of deep tech investors that are quite active in defense. So that can include NIF per se, but also Project A and other of these players. They might not invest in each sector of defense. So then, to get very granular. So that's also something that we allow users to do. You can check if they invested in really a weapon system, or if they invested in, drones, if they invested in this kind of active, or only maybe or only on the security side. So you need to get very granular sometimes to understand if it's the right investor for you. And then there's, of course, some generalists that have demonstrated with their investment or with other activity that they have a strong interest in the sector and are backing some of the companies. And then, of course, there's international investors. Since some of them have been active in this space for quite a long time. And they often come up even at later stages, but some of them even can be at Series A in some cases.
But it's also hard to overstate how much this landscape has changed in the last few years, both from, well, that top bucket that you mentioned, which was pretty empty a few years ago, and now that's getting pretty crowded. But in particular, the attitudes of the more generalist funds and the appetite for them to be investing in defense, which really was like a no-go area for a very long time.
Yeah, there are still challenges, to be honest, and this you need to dig down for each investor. But for sure, until a couple of years ago, you really couldn't find a way to invest in defense in Europe because all the LPs agreements were kind of forbidding it. So actually some funds, and we cannot make too much name, but people in the ecosystem have been investing in particular ways from pockets of money they had from people in the fund, or for special vehicles, trying to do some of this investment while they couldn't do from the main fund. Some of this has been rediscussed with the new funds being raised or things like that. So there's a bit more openness, but still, if you're really in some of the most critical, like active system, pure missile for offense or things like that, then this investor scene shrinks a bit. So depending exactly what you do, you need to navigate this very carefully.
And equally, there are quite a few funds who will these days say that they will invest in dual use, and then if it starts looking a little bit too defensive, they get cold feet. I think that's probably still fair to say. But we also had a question earlier about the venture landscape in smaller European markets such as Portugal. The venture landscape is dominated by generalist funds. What are the necessary conditions for a dedicated defense tech investment ecosystem to emerge in, for example, Portugal?
Yeah, so I think I can so this was what we were saying before, like a lot of new funds, being launched of these defense funds. Like you can see in 2024, according to our definition, there were 10 funds launched, which is more than all history before, like Ukraine. So of course, the startup scene has increased a lot. For very small markets, it really depends. Sometimes it might not make sense to have a pure defense fund, in Portugal. Maybe there's not enough, a market for that. So there are needs, ways to go around it. There can be some European focused, mostly defense fund that maybe get some money from a Portuguese LPs, and they commit to spend some of that money in Portugal. So that's one way. Or then can be some funds that, even of the general or some, bit more specialist deep tech that allocate a bit of their fund to defense. So those are typically the two ways. So for each country, these are being depend on a range of factors, LPs, which kind of LPs, kind of agreement that you have. But let's say, of course, the startup scene is not, it's growing a lot, but it's not that huge. So you cannot always have a dedicated fund in each country or whatever, So it might depend a bit. So I don't know if every fund is making this calculation, making this kind of discussion. Can they even raise, that kind of fund in Portugal? I don't have something, I think, in Portugal on my radar specifically. I know in Spain there's something being raised. And, in general, some have Southern Europe as focused. Can check, that, yeah, I guess if it's a very, general startup scene, they might not be always the most, the most set up to really tackle this market in some cases.
Nice, thanks. If other people do have questions, then do drop them into the chat and we'll try and answer them for you.
Yeah, I think going quickly through a few last bits, what we were saying before is that, when you scale up, then of course quite some money still comes from the US. So that we see here in green. So this is like typically the big rounds, but they tend to enter sometimes even at the early stages. And overall, we have seen this shift in the market also in the fact that now the top investors, by number of rounds, tend to be really defense first or like with strong experience in defense, while a few years back it was mostly generalist. So of course this market has changed a lot, and we still have a lot more funds getting involved, at least in one defense deal. So this chart for you, each fund that makes at least one investment in a year is counted once. If they do 10 or one investment, they still count as one. So it's like there's now 3 times more, than the number of investors that at least touch defense in some way every year in Europe than a few years back. So it's not just especially there's a lot of generalists maybe doing 1-2 deals in there. So that there are a lot of more especially, but a lot so. Everyone is, of course, jumping a bit on the wagon of this success.
From what I know of our numbers on active investors overall, that's about 10% then of active funds that are doing something in defence. So yeah, it's not just small fringe anymore.
Yeah, I didn't check that, but I guess that sounds reasonable. Yeah, I
think we have about 3,500 active investors a year in Europe.
Yeah, and then something we also did pull out is it's some analysis on the background of these people and these funds. So like the key question we were getting asked a lot is like, okay, you call yourself as a defense fund or whatever, but like, are the people in your team really, I don't know, more experienced? Can they add some value and so on? So we ran an analysis together with Taxonomy of us, the big search and executive search firm, and we found that the data showed quite clearly that defense tech funds, the specialist one, have more than twice the number of team members that have military or defense ministry experience, MOD, compared to what are generalist funds with some activity in defense. So in these newer funds, more focused funds, you have really a lot more people that have experience of this market, that maybe have experience of what the procurement means, what some challenges are. So there, in some way, this ecosystem growing of this dedicated fund also offering a bit more of this advice and navigation to startups.
I'm actually surprised at the 12% of generalist funds. That's really interesting.
Yeah, it's still generalist fund, only the ones that we selected. So there are still people that invest quite a bit in defense. If you look at all generalist fund, then of course it's gonna be like 0%, 1%, but like that didn't feel too like this is like the people that you typically would raise from. There's still a difference between if they are generalist or specialist.
Got it. Very interesting.
And we run similar analysis on the founder side. I will not show everything here, but like there's some analysis on the specific role that typically have military experience or not, if a CEO level, CFO, chief security officer, things like that. But we'll not go into that at the moment. To close off the analysis side, we have 2 more analyses coming out next week at Slash. One on the Nordic defense landscape. So if you are focused on that market, we are releasing that in a couple of days with Danske Growth. And then we have a report on the eastern flank that's been called very nicely tough tech by the top 10. It's a bit of a, which is basically to say it's a broader defense, security, and resilience lens that we were mentioning before across all the countries that kind of border with Russia. So like the Baltics, Finland, Poland, Romania, border or like very close to the border. And we show a bit, what's happening in the startup scene there with a lot of funds from the different countries in the region.
Nice, but we also wanted to show a little bit about where this data comes from. So all of the data in this analysis is aggregated from the Deal Room platform, and it's company level data, and you can kind of interrogate it and explore it on the platform as well. So we'll show you kind of how it works and what some of the things that you can do.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so one for one way to start, when one logs into the room is, okay, you don't know what segments this is, what do we mean with defense and so on. So you can go in the sector tab and type something like defense or security or whatever you're interested on. You will get suggested, some sectors. Some of these are, what we consider really as defense or the adjacent in this case. So it pops here, defense application, then quantum, some parts of space, and then things like drones. You can see already here like a quick overview, many companies, much VC investment, what's the total value of this company, a bit of an aggregated score of really how strong the activity across all these parameters is. So of course, defense, quantum are quite active market at the moment. And then one can click here, or if one clicks on some of these segments, it opens a full overview. So you can see some of the new founders in this sector, a bit of overall statistics, funding trends. You can see early stage startup, more scaled up big companies in the sector. And you can go, of course, then see each of these companies specifically. So if I click on here maybe and I go into defense, then I can see all these companies, filter them by any parameter that I want on the stage, on the funding and so on. So maybe I want to see which are the really recent ones, and maybe I'm a seed investor, so I want to even have some parameter on how much they already raised or which kind of funding they raised or things like that. So can say I want less than 5 million or things like that. And then, you can explore this sector. And of course, you can go more granular if you want only what is like robotics or what is like space. So we provide that kind of granularity for you to have a look at. If you go on one of these companies' profile, you will also, see the whole kind of taxonomy that they have behind. And some of them will also be in some mappings. So, for instance, this is a weapons and defense system that is part of this mapping. And you can also explore a bit how we think about this sector. And all of this is like interactive. So you can go into one of these and see all the companies and see all the information, filter, export, do whatever you want to do.
One of the more important bits as well is that once you build that query, so founded since 2024 and in defense and less than 5 million raised, you can save that search. And it will mean that you get a notification as soon as there's a new match to that search. Any new companies that come on our radar or that hit certain milestones that you've put in as the parameters, then it will you'll be told in your notification center, but you can also get emails each day that will alert you to any new matches, so that you can keep on top of all of it. And yeah, we do all the tracking for you basically.
Yeah, and of course, like you can also do more creative things like checking, what kind of where do the founder come from. So maybe you want to see all the founders that worked at Airbus or or some other, or Thales or Leonardo or whatever. And so you can also run this kind of searches and mix them with what what the company is doing, or just want to see all that's coming from those companies. So you can also run those kind of queries and then check if some of these companies might be good candidates for you.
Yes, that's some of the coolest features is the people data, because it's often the founders that investors and corporates that are interested in these innovative companies, they care. It's the founder is the most important signal right at the start, and yeah, we can tell you when there are new companies founded by the alumni of certain defense primes or other unicorn startups, or if they've spun out of a university, or if it's founded by somebody with a PhD. All of these kind of people level data factors that you can put in there as well.
So in here, in the founder section, you have a lot of stuff that you can do. You can see serial founder, you can see what kind of education experience or working experience they have and things like that, where they studied, both single universities or, if they studied in a certain country or things like that. So you can mix all of these parameters depending on what's your investment scope and what kind of sourcing or what kind of benchmark you want to do.
Yeah, you can also keep track of every funding round that happens, every exit that happens as well, in any of the areas that you're particularly interested in. Again, you can build those queries in here, and then you can get an overview of them, but also save it so that you get notified as soon as there's any new ones. We just had another question as well, which is, will the Nordic Defence Tech report presentation on November 18th be streamed? I think we don't know the answer to that at the moment.
I don't think, I think typically very little, so because Nato is happening as Slash, and very little of Slash content can be streamed. So tentatively, I'd say almost nothing will be streamed, but everything will be, on the D-Room website just after, in terms of, the report. But the presentation itself, I think it's only for people that are at the event.
Yeah, I think so. Well, we will send out the slides from that Lorenzo was sharing during the session as well, in case anybody wants to take a quick look at the closer look at the data. We'll put those years back into that chart before we do. But thank you very much, everybody, for joining us. We do have a little offer for anybody who is interested, and if you'd like to have a chat about some more defense tech data, you can book a session with us, with Lorenzo. We can discuss your needs. So there's a QR code there and a link there if you'd like to book in a session. We'd be happy to chat to you about defense tech and anything else. But thank you all again for joining. Hope you enjoyed it. We'll be back soon. The next briefing is going to be on spin-outs, and that is coming in a couple of weeks' time. So we will send the link to you for that one as well, in case you'd like to join. Thanks all for joining, and see you soon.